Hi, second graders. So we are nearing the end of chapter 5, Exploring Our Past. We have learned about the first Americans, otherwise known as the Native Americans. We've also learned about early explorers like Leif Erikson, who traveled to the North American continent in the year 1000. Later, Christopher Columbus followed in the year 1492. And one of the best ways to remember that from my own childhood, I'm pretty sure you've heard it before, is in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So that's one way to remember it. This week, we're going to be taking a look at colonies. Eventually, we had the Native Americans, then we had some explorers from Europe that discovered, well, you could say discovered the North American continent, but then we had people who decided to colonize the North American continent. So in 1607, 3 ships sailed into a bay along the east coast of America. The ships carried men from England. The men had come to start a colony in the New World. Now, colony is going to be one of our vocabulary words, and we can see here it says, a colony is formed when people from one country settle in another. You now have a colony. A colony usually keeps close ties to its home country. The Englishmen named their colony Jamestown after King James of England. They called the place they settled Fort James. They soon realized the Native Americans who lived nearby were not always friendly. The men built a tall log fence around the fort. Life was not easy in Jamestown. Many of the men would not work. Many became sick, and many even died. One of the men, John Smith, wanted to get along with the Indians. Well, they're technically called Native Americans. They knew good places to hunt and fish. They knew which plants would grow well. Perhaps they could help the men of Jamestown. One day, some men from the Powhatan, I believe is how it's pronounced, Powhatan tribe captured John Smith and brought him to their chief. Chief Powhatan's young daughter, Pocahontas, became Smith's friend. Soon the chief let Smith return to Jamestown. Pocahontas visited the fort often. She brought food, but the English and the Powhatans still didn't trust each other. Sometimes they fought and even killed each other. On Tuesday, looks like we're going to be looking at a few other pages. There's one more page here. Life at Jamestown did get better. John Smith became the leader of the men, and he made all the men work. The men learned to grow crops. They built new houses. Women eventually came to Jamestown and helped form families. King James let Jamestown form its own government. John Smith returned to England, and later Pocahontas was kidnapped by an English sea captain. During her stay with the English, a pastor told her of Jesus Christ. She became a Christian and married an Englishman named John Rolfe. All right, so there were some issues when Jamestown was first formed. There was a lot of sickness, some laziness, which is not a good thing, and there was also fighting with the North Americans or the Native Americans. So colonies is the vocabulary word you want to take away from there. Again, a colony is formed when people from one country settle in another. On Tuesday, it talks about slaves in the New World. Jamestown was the first English colony to last in the New World. More and more people came from England to live there. They needed more help with their crops. Some Europeans and Africans came to Jamestown to be servants. They worked for food, clothes, and land, and after a few years of work, they could be free. Before long, Europeans began making African people slaves. And that is a vocabulary word right there. A slave had to work for the rest of his life. He could never be free. Slavery would be a long, sad part of American life for years to come. It's a dark part of history. But we also have a timeline. I'm on page 88. We have a timeline here. And so before the year 1000, we know that the Native Americans were living on the North American continent. Around the time of 1000, Leif Erikson, an explorer from Europe, was the first to arrive in North America. In the year 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Then later on, in the year 1607, we have the formation of Jamestown. So that timeline kind of gives an example of the early American explorers. So why did the first slaves come to America? It's because the people there needed help with the crops. So that right there, the vocabulary word you want to take away from there is slaves. Then to wrap up the chapter on page 89, talks about a gentleman named Richard Hunt. Richard Hunt was a preacher who came to live in Jamestown in 1607. Hunt believed God had a job for him to do in the New World. He wanted to tell the Indians, Native Americans, about Jesus Christ. Hunt became a pastor of the men in Jamestown. Every day he called them together to pray. Every Sunday he preached God's word. He helped the men settle problems. He comforted them when they were afraid. He did not complain, even when the fire in the fort burned up his books. He trusted God to do what was best. Robert Hunt died during his first year of Jamestown, but the men never forgot his brave faith in God. And you can see here, there's a picture of him towards the top of the page, and then down towards the bottom, there is the Robert Hunt Memorial. We all loved him for his exceeding goodness. All right, so we're going to be wrapping up this chapter this week, and next week there's going to be a test on Wednesday. So your instructions for your work this week on page 85, you are just using that timeline that can be found on page 88 to number the order of events. So what happened first? The ship sailed into the bay, Pocahontas became a Christian, the men built a fort, or John Smith made friends. So you want to number those pictures in order 1 to 4. On page 87 and 89, page 89, you're going to cut out those pictures, and then you're going to need some glue or some tape, and paste them onto page 87 in the order they happened. So what happened first? What happened second, third, and fourth? You're going to go ahead and post those and paste those onto page 87 in the right order. And you can use page 88 to help you out. Then on page 91, you're going to start our review. We'll continue the review next week. Explorer's Route to America. It says use the map to answer the questions. So for number 1, from what continent did the explorers start? Anybody remember? If you said Europe, you're correct. Pat yourself on the back. There were some explorers looking for a different continent. Do you remember what continent they were looking for when they ran into North America? Number 3, what continent did the explorers find? And then number 4, what ocean did the explorers cross on the route to North America? All right, and all your answers are right there on the map. So that'll be it for this week, and then again next week we'll pick up our review and then take the test on Wednesday next week. I hope you guys are having a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.